Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'll introduce myself in just a second, but as I was suggesting, if you have the ability to log into socrative.com and hit the student login button there in the upper right-hand corner, it'll ask you for a room name. The room name for this one is Ross, CSU Simp, to make the typing a little bit faster. I'm just going to collect a little bit of introductory information this way about who's in the room. Of course, this works really well in large lecture settings. And I was just mentioning to one of our participants here that I normally do this to collect formative assessment at the beginning of class. I want to know something, in this case, about the population of people present in the room, your experiences, your practices, for example, so that I can best tailor the next 25 minutes or so to your needs or interests. And while you're doing that, I'm watching on my laptop, which is running the Socrative activity, and I can see that everybody is at least starting the quiz or assessment at this point. So if I was being really tech intricate right now, I would have also plugged the laptop into the projection system, so I would also then show you the results of this quiz, and you would see the results. So I'll tell you right now what the trends are of the respondents so far. Everybody is saying yes, they usually prepare lectures before class. Probably a good teaching practice. Results are a bit mixed on presentation tools. We've got PowerPoint, Keynote, and Google Slides as the options. So I'll note that nobody said explain everything. That's fine. I'm not paid by Explain Everything. No conflict of interest there, but I do use Explain Everything for presentations, and that's the app that I'm using right now for this presentation. And if there's time, I'll tell you why I use Explain Everything. Hardware and operating system, it looks like it's desktops and laptops being used to present, Windows and Mac operating systems, again, not surprising. And as far as the last question, which animals you would like to learn about today, pick two. Some of you didn't pick two, but that's okay. The leader so far is canids. Yes. People want to know about dogs. Okay. So, a bit of introduction about myself. So I'm a faculty member here in biology, which is why I'm interested in what you want to learn about biology today. You are in the right session. This is about canning the canned classroom presentation. But I teach in a particular fashion, so as means of background, I've been involved in the course redesign with technology program at the CSU system. I'm also one of the first faculty members in the Discovery program here at Fresno State, which is a mobile device-based teaching program that our president Castro started soon after I arrived on campus. And so this is a life cycle of my typical class, where you're experiencing from minus 10 minutes to 0 minutes, there would be an entry Socrative activity. I'd collect feedback from the audience. I would use Explain Everything, the app, to present, and I would usually review and get feedback from students, question and answer at the start of class. What did you not understand last class? Let's talk about any misconceptions before we move forward into usually using PDFs or Google Classroom slides or other active learning techniques to do workshops, do problem solving, do practice in class while I'm there with the students. Traditional flipped classroom approach, blended learning. Students ask questions, I answer them, we discuss. They take an exit ticket quiz. What didn't you learn about today that you'd like to learn more about next time? And then outside of class, they do the content learning. They would do Google Docs collaboratively with other students. They would Zoom with me in office hours potentially. They would watch materials I'd prepared in advance, like videos posted to YouTube, and then they'd come back to class. So that's my teaching philosophy, which is important to understand what I like to do in class in terms of the lecturing, like what I'm doing right now. This short period of time when I might be actually lecturing at the start of class using Explain Everything. At the start of every class, I always like to point out the learning objectives. So for those of us that are here today, I'd like you to be able to debate two perspectives, whether or not to can the canned presentation. Here are the lecture slides. So So usually I would post these on Blackboard, our learning management system, and then students would have them before class. So they could come to class having the PowerPoint or PDF slides or PowerPoint slides loaded on their laptop or tablet. They could take notes on top of them, or they could print them out and bring them to class. So here are the learning objectives. Here are the slides. Let's go. Okay, so introduction to genetic analysis. I'm going to try to hit that second one, that point first. So we're going to need to understand all of these items. This is this entire lecture from the book today. This is just the PowerPoint slides straight out of the textbook. We're going to cover these 7 topics, and we're going to start with DNA, which is the material that's hereditary. Here's a statue of DNA. It's important to know that if you can stick your right arm up the helix, if you can imagine your arm wrapping around the helix, that's a right-handed helix, and that's going to be important later in this. Does anybody have any questions? About anything, by the way, right now? Anything at all? I'm not surprised. Well, I'm going to try to. So, based on what was, let's see, who was it? It was canids, right, that we're supposed to be talking about? Okay, well, let's talk about speciation in canids, how biologists define different species. So first of all, watch what happens. What's this?
A poodle.
It's a poodle. Okay. Then joining the poodle comes the black lab. So that means if we mated these 2 dogs, what would we make? The Labradoodle. Yep. Always evokes a good reaction. So the concept here is when you cross 2 organisms, when you mate them together, if their offspring are both alive, that is, they're not dead, or they can produce offspring together, and if those offspring, the Labradoodle, are fertile, if they themselves can parent offspring, then we define those 2 parents as members of the same species. That's how biologists distinguish 2 different species. If you mate 2 organisms together and they can't have kids, or they have kids but the kids are sterile, they're 2 different species. Any questions about that? Okay, good. Now I want to share with you a little bit about the research that I do in my research laboratory. And that is, I study speciation, but not in dogs, not in horses, and not in pigeons, although that would be particularly fascinating. Rather, I study this in a particular species of worm. And so what I do is the students and I in my class will mate these worms together, and then on the x-axis here, we study different strains of worm, and on the y-axis I measure how many individual offspring each of those worms can produce on their own to try to figure out which ones have no offspring. They're members of different species. And in this case I discovered, and my students also discovered, that there were some worms that have fewer offspring on average. The black thick line there is the average number of offspring an individual worm can produce. Around 180, but in this strain it's a little bit higher, so maybe these 2 populations of worms are starting to speciate. The whole point of having just done this is you see these figures animate in from the edges of the slide. You can do really interesting things. This doesn't just require this app. You can do this in PowerPoint. You can do this not quite like this in Google Slides, PowerPoint, and so forth. Keynote. So the reason that I like explain everything in particular is you can actually have all of these images off the screen and drag them into the visible area when you're projecting to students. Why would you want to do this? This is a rhetorical question. So let me ask you, why do you prepare slides before class, for those of you that do? What's your thinking behind wanting to provide students that resource, or provide it yourself, even if you don't give it to the students? What's the benefit?
I use it as a way of scaffolding knowledge.
Okay, so scaffolding knowledge, so you want to have some sort of structure that the students can lead themselves through, or you lead them through. Organization, yeah. Making sure you don't miss something that you're supposed to cover that class period. That's why I do it. It's sort of like my outline, every slide, even if you don't have lots of written text like the publishers, and those are mostly pictures, right?
Course outcomes.
Right. So I did this all the time, and I killed myself, not literally, figuratively, in the amount of time I spend preening my slides, because I'm kind of anal retentive because I'm a scientist. And so I would spend hours, like, ooh, that image doesn't look quite right. Let me edit it. Let me crop it a little bit so that you can't see the figure number because I stole it from the textbook, so you crop the caption out or whatever. I spent so much time perfecting the slides that I think I personally let my teaching slip a little bit. I was spending all my time just preparing the materials. And there were some other reasons that I didn't like. Eventually, I discovered I think there are some detriments to preparing the slides in advance and giving them to the students. So that's basically why I'm here today, is to offer this suggestion. Just one, is how to improv lecture. And why would that be better potentially than giving the students the slides in advance, do you think?
Could go at their pace and include more kind of relevant kind of.
Okay, so you can follow if the students are willing to engage you in discussion, in conversation, yeah, you're not fixed to, that's my perspective. I'm not fixed to this 3-hour beautiful set of slides that I created that I want to damn well make sure we get through because I spent time perfecting those slides. I personally, and of course this is just a mental thing, I personally feel more free to follow student interests in class. And if that gets us to making the material more relevant to students because we're doing what they're interested in or talking about what they're interested in, maybe that keynote we just watched gets a little bit closer to our grasp, making material relevant to students. Maybe. Other reasons? So on either side, pro slide, anti slides.
Well, it is PowerPoint.
Is that a pro or con?
Yeah, I can't tell. So it is PowerPoint, yes. So I've looked at it as a resource for absent students. So anyone who's not in class, yes, they can download the slides. The problems, though, are twofold. One, and maybe this is your experience as well, I don't know, I'm just going to say from my perspective, I found that when I stopped providing slides in advance, students, didn't know what to expect. They could read on the syllabus, this is the topic for the day. But when I come into class, if you have now this set of slides, what do you think the students think? Again, this is just me hypothesizing. What do you think the students think when they see, how many slides are there? I mean, it's the chapter from the textbook. I know a lot of my colleagues do this. We're going to do a chapter a day.
This scared me.
So how many are they numbered?
Oh, just even the material scared me.
Well, there's that. Yeah, there's that too. So you can see what's coming.
4 times that many pages, yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
13.
Okay, so tens of pages of lecture slides. You can see what's coming, and if it scares you, then maybe you think, holy crap, I can't.
Well,
We're going to get from here to there in one class period?
Well, I feel comfortable because I've got all the slides, so I don't need to pay attention.
But what if
Ah.
I understand it?
So, okay, so we're getting some interesting concepts here. That I've got all the materials, so what I get is, why should I bother coming to class? Here are all the notes.
Well, I think preparing in advance is advantageous as telling the student to read ahead. I think the fact that you know what's going to be discussed makes you allows you to summarize information much more readily here. That's no different than reading ahead, except it's more focused on this is what we're going to do.
Yeah,
I think
absolutely.
It's very advantageous for them to have an idea of what's going to be discussed.
So I agree, and I'm sort of wishy-washy. I sit in both camps. I still do prepare presentations in advance for my classes. I put less content on the slides, and that's basically what this demonstration is about, is how I'm just sharing how I prepare for class and try to make my presentations flexible so that depending on where the student conversation might go that I can respond
Right.
without having students given them a preconceived notion of where I want them to go in that class period. And so it's scary. It's a lot of work. Instead of putting work into preparing slides, now I put work into preparing everything. So one of the questions is, how do you control for all the different ways students could potentially want to go in class? The basic approach that I take is, well, with Explain Everything, what I'm doing right now is I have a slide where you can see basically what you were just looking at. There's a presentation window that I'm going to box because you can't see it in the presentation view, but that part of the screen in this app is what's actually being projected. Everything outside it is content I've pre-populated on this slide, so that if students want to talk about it, I just drag it into the window. That's how you saw the dogs appear and so forth. I was just dragging material from the pasteboard into the active present projection space. So this is how I can the canned presentation, is by preparing in advance what sort of material I think the students are going to want to see. But you could do this without Explain Everything. Explain Everything is just an app. It doesn't work on laptops. It has to be a tablet or a smartphone. There's a small price, really, literally a small price, and it would be just for faculty. Students don't need this. It's just the faculty members that would need it to present.
Do you have a strategy for organizing the content around that?
I do, but it's sort of long-winded. Yeah. So I try to group like materials together. So I had the dogs sitting up there next to the horses and the pigeons, so that in case somebody said they wanted to talk to either of those, they were all in the same area of the pasteboard, so that I knew that was the area to select images from. But yeah, you could get very complicated if you wanted to about doing this. This, though, doesn't have to be done in Explain Everything. The alternative, which you can do in Explain Everything or Google Slides or Keynote or PowerPoint, is to use the little menu window, Add Image. And you select from the internet, you select from your camera roll, and you place an image during class into the presentation. It's a little bit more dynamic than having the image already there, which again, in my perspective, just gives students that preconceived notion of this is what we have to cover today. Just because I'm always prone to go overtime, even though we're going to get some signs in a couple minutes about how many minutes there are left, I just want to share one other thought before we basically lapse into conversation discussion. Is I saw attendance increase when I started doing this because I haven't studied this, I think it's because students don't know what the material is going to be in class. And question asking went way up. I suspect, again I don't know, I suspect that what happened was that they didn't see how much material I wanted to cruise through in that class period. The students didn't know in advance how long per slide I needed to get that whole packet finished by the end of the class period. So I felt it was freeing both for me in terms of the time that I spend creating the materials, but also it freed up discussion in the class. Students asked a lot more questions, and we went off in rather interesting directions. Sometimes I don't have the right images preloaded for what I need, but if it's a class period like speciation, well, what did I do today? What sort of questions did I ask you in that PowerPoint, or the Socrative quiz? I asked you a bunch of technology questions. That was just so I got a feeling for who was in the room and what your experiences have been. What was the other question that I asked? The very last one. Which, pardon? Yeah, which animal would you like to learn about? So I'm giving the students choice at the start of class, but I've already pre-selected the choice for them. So I'm giving the illusion of choice. I'm basically trying to direct the conversation in certain ways that I've prepared for. So I give choice, but I still don't show the students exactly in ahead where we're going to go during the class period. So once again, I've made a duplicate slide. So I've got lots of duplicates of this. So every time I create a new slide, it shows up like a blank slide, but I always have this set of materials to draw from. And for example, I could put that Explain Everything logo and their Twitter feed right there in the middle of the slide. If you want to learn more about Explain Everything, that's where to go for resources. And I've written a lot about this process. I posted a blog post at my blog if you want to get in touch. And I also post all of my videos online, all of them, lectures, those sorts of things, because not only does Explain Everything do presentation and you can annotate on top of your slides like I've been doing with the laser pointer tool and with the pen tool, and there are other tools as well, but I'm also recording right now. Again, I'm not paid by Explain Everything. This is just my favorite tool for teaching. And it's recording everything that happens on the screen and audio in the room from the microphone on the tablet. So right now, we'll do question and answer. If you want to come up and play with this and try Explain Everything, I'm happy to host you doing that. We can talk more about your thoughts about what I'm pitching right now. But when I'm done, I'm going to stop recording, export this as a movie file, upload it to YouTube. So if you want to revisit anything that we talked about today, you just go to youtube.com/c/ it's for custom Joseph Ross, and this video will be there. I do this for the students. So even though they don't have the lecture slides per se, they have a recording of the class after class. So they don't get it beforehand, but they do have a resource that's a digital resource they can access. So that's the extent of my pitch, and I know it's a lot of talking at, so I'm not modeling good active learning right now. But if you have any questions, comments, concerns, gripes, criticisms, let's talk.
I'm curious if there's something, oh, sorry, go ahead.
It's not really an either or situation, because you're not really locked into your slides. I mean, you could still present it and not stay on script.
Absolutely. Yeah, you
totally. So I'm doing a lot of Blackboard, even chalk. So if things go off, so I didn't get through all of them. What's important is I get through them by midterm time. I get to the material I want to cover, but lecture per lecture, you can still kind of be, a little free with the delivery anyway.
Yeah, so.
It depends on personality.
And that's another, again, I sound like a commercial, but that's one of the reasons I like this as well, is it's easier for me to insert, instead of Blackboard, whiteboard, I can stick this in between slides. So I totally hear what you're saying, and you're totally right. So you can skip slides. I see pros and cons to doing that. Yeah, I'll leave it at that.
You gave them up front, but you didn't show it.
Right. Yeah. And yeah, so I think that will be an individual instructor issue, what you're comfortable with. I know when I give professional presentations at conferences, I don't want to be the one, so this is a different situation than in class. I don't want to be the one that gets to the end of your 50-minute allotted time and is like, okay, let me skip to the end, because then I'd look unprepared. At least that's my perception of the situation. And I personally feel the same way when I do that in class.
Yeah. So that's
But yeah, different strokes for different folks. And you're right, absolutely, it's a continuum. So I have a hybrid, basically, strategy. Sometimes I do this, sometimes I have lecture slides. When I know there's specific content I need to cover, I don't need to bother dragging it in from the pasteboard. It's just already there. For example, that's why
separate version of my slides that I upload for students that doesn't have everything, that doesn't have my questions on it that I'm going to ask them during class, because then they prepare ahead of time, and you have two people who have prepared and read the slides and answer all the questions, and so I take those off before I upload my slides. But if there have been times where I've forgotten to upload the slides for whatever reason, and the students are always like, oh, you don't have the slides, you need to upload the slides, and they freak out about it, right? And so I'm wondering how your students respond. And then I've done some flipped stuff as well, where I record a lecture and put it online, and the students are like, I listened to your lecture on metabolism. I teach cell and molecular biology 5 times, and I took a lot of notes on it. And I'm like, that is not what you should be doing. You should listen to it once as though it were the lecture in class, not 5 times and taking notes. So I'm curious about how your approach is received by students and what you think they do with the material you're uploading.
So I know the nice thing about uploading videos or any sort of recordings to YouTube is you get access to the YouTube analytics. And so I can go back and see how much video time and how many accesses to each movie there have been.
Yeah.
So that's useful, but unfortunately it takes a long time for those quantitative statistics to pile up. So on a day-to-day basis, you don't really have the resolution to tell who's watching and who's not. In response to students, how they watch material in advance, I just coach them that the goal is to come up with questions. I think I even put it in my syllabus. I said the goal is, yeah, watch the material once. If there's something you really don't understand, come to class and ask, because that's what the purpose of a flipped class, now we're getting a little bit off topic, but that's fine.
Yeah.
That's the purpose of the flipped classroom, is that you identify what you don't understand outside of class in a low-risk environment, and then you come to class and you ask, hopefully in a low-risk way. So I let students email me questions in advance so that they don't even have to raise their hand in class and ask, because they don't like to do that. Yeah. So I just make it clear in advance. The goal is to come up with questions and identify things in the video that you didn't understand.
But it sounds like they're asking more questions.
They do ask, for this approach, they do ask a lot more questions in class. So I don't really understand that. Can you go through that a little bit more in detail? And the other thing I like about this is I don't know, you can tell me. I didn't prepare any evaluation forms for this workshop. But I think this is also a more dynamic way to teach. It's like writing on the chalkboard. So students don't know what they're going to expect. Maybe it looks, I don't know if it seems more professional to ad-lib than it does to have prepared slides. I'd have to ask the students. But I think it's more engaging to do things that are a little bit more dynamic and free form than just clicking a button and going to the next slide. I'm not trying to cast any aspersions on people that do. This is just what I came to after 6 years of teaching genetics. Well, thank you all very much for coming. And again, we do have like 1 minute left. I'm happy to step outside in the hallway and show you, explain everything if you want. Actually, this is the last one, so we're going back to the place with the thing.
Could I do it on a phone, do you think?
Yeah.
Yeah, explain everything is available on a phone.